So today is May 20th, 2020. My name is George Thomas Kairos Raybon III. Long name came from my great-grandfather, George Thomas. My father's name was George, therefore the third. Kairos is my Filipino name, and that is all on my birth certificate. So, this is how we begin. I've always wanted to tell my story because I don't think a lot of people know who I am. And in the midst of doing that, I had to find out who I am actually myself. So this is my story. So May 17th, 1984 is when it all began. I was born, and some people know that I was born in California. So I am from California, Redwood City, California to be exact. Sequoia Hospital. It was around 7:23, 7:48. I never remember the time. I don't look at my birth certificate daily, so I'd always forget. But I know it was early in the morning, and it wasn't a regular delivery. I was actually a month early. But the funny thing about that is I was 8 pounds, 9 ounces already. So as you can imagine, and if you've ever seen my mother, which you will, she's not the biggest of ladies. She's very tiny. So it was an emergency C-section, and I actually almost lost my mother during my birth because she lost a lot of blood. But luckily, thankfully, I didn't. So I'm very grateful for that. But I did give her a great iodine allergy. So now she can't eat seafood. So sorry about that, Mom. But, it happens. But growing up for me was definitely interesting. My parents separated when I was 1. But I saw my father at least until I was about 3 or 4. And then he truly disappeared from my life. Anything about my father I remember just from pictures. I don't really remember, or I don't have very many memories of my father, but just through pictures. So growing up for me was just with my mother, only child, single parent, but our family unit was very strong. I am half black, half Filipino. So I tell people I grew up Asian because that's what I was around growing up my entire life. My grandmother and my aunt. Now, the funny thing about my aunt is that we are only 9 years apart. So it's almost like I had a sibling, but she was my aunt. But we definitely grew up like we were brother and sister. That was definitely a fun time, especially in Redwood City, California at the time. I hate using the cliche of, running the streets, but we kind of did. My aunt had her problems, but nothing more than any teen at that time did. So, seeing her go through that was hard sometimes because, like I said, it was almost like losing a sibling if she, had to go to juvie or anything like that. But it was kind of another lesson for me. So a lot of people always say that only children grow up spoiled. And, I try to debunk that because I didn't grow up spoiled. But yes, I did get everything that I wanted. But with that, I knew my mom did whatever she had to do in order to get that stuff for me. There were plenty of times that she said no. Lots of times that she said no. But most of the time, I got what I wanted. But again, without her doing what she had to do, I wouldn't have been able to get those things. So I really understood that growing up. So early in the morning, my mom would wake me up. She would get me in the car and take me over to my grandmother's house. And I can remember my grandmother's house where everything is placed, where the couches were, where the bedroom was, everything in the kitchen to the pot with the lid that didn't have a handle, but we used a fork to lift it up. I remember my grandmother's apartment like yesterday. It's funny, as we get older, we can remember things from when we were 3 or 4 years old, like they were yesterday, but things from yesterday we can't even remember. But my mom would drop me off because she would then go to work real early. And then I would go to work with my grandmother. my grandmother, for all her life, was a nurse. When she came over here, she became a nurse, and that's what she did. And then as she grew older, she went from the hospitals to nursing homes. So sometimes I would go to the hospital with her, and then sometimes I would go to the nursing home. And I remember specifically one nursing home in Stockton, which took like 2 hours to get to from Redwood City. I think that's the time. If anyone's from California, you know how spread out things are in Northern California. But it was interesting because I was around all these older people who were, in their last days, and they were so joyful, and some, to the point of senility, that they didn't know where they were. But even at that point, it didn't matter. They were so happy, and just having conversations with them, even as a young child, was very enlightening, because it's just like, and at the time you don't know what's going on because you're just a kid. You're like, oh, these are just old people. But it was, now I look back on it, I'm like, wow, you kind of think about where you get some of that knowledge from, and it possibly could have been from those people, and it's great to think of that way. So, we'd finish work, and I'd go back to her house. She would usually fix dinner, and then my mom would come, she would eat, and then she would take me back, and we would, go back home. It wasn't like that all the time especially when I started going to school. But those are times that, I'll never forget, living on that street and the drives to my grandmother's house, riding the BART on those old days. And I remember seeing the two buses with the Slinky in the middle. I remember getting on one of those for the first time, and I was always so excited to sit in the middle where the Slinky was, because it always moved, and when the bus would turn, that wouldn't really turn, and I don't know, for some reason that was enjoyable to me, so that was interesting. But there were those times, and then the times with my aunt, which I don't want to say too much, but those were fun, because my aunt was a renowned skater, not figure skater, but roller skater. And I remember her growing up, and she was going to be really, really, really good until she had a big accident coming down on one of her twists, and she broke her ankle. And ever since that moment, she couldn't do it. So we would always go to the skating rink Friday nights, where everyone knew her. So we could always skip the line, get in. I would hang out, behind the shoe rack or the skating rack. Just little moments like that in my memory bank that bring me back to a happier time. Like I said, I look back on pictures and I think to myself, well, who was this kid? Because I don't even recognize myself, my younger self. But it brings me back to a time when things were good. Not that things aren't good now, but I was like, this is really cool to think back on those times and to see where I came from and what really made me. Like I said, I never had a relationship with my father. When they separated, he was no longer playing for the 49ers. When my parents met, he was on the team. I don't like to say playing because he didn't really play, but he was on the team. And my mother would tell me stories about the galas and the events that they went to, where she got to meet Jerry Rice and Joe Montana, which to me is like the most amazing thing, especially being a big football fan and having played football and coached. I'm like, these are legends, and you got to meet them and I didn't, but it's one of those things. But he was big into drugs and alcohol, and that eventually was the demise of their relationship. So I never had that relationship. And it's not funny, but I know some people growing up often ask me, could I or do I resent my mother for doing that, leaving him? And emphatically will always say no, because I am the person I am now today because of my mother. There's nothing at this point, obviously, and nothing at the beginning that my father could have done that would have changed me or made me someone different. So I'm very grateful and thankful for that. As I grew up in California, to say things were tumultuous is a lie, because to me they weren't. Little did I know that my father was trying to not really find us, or I guess technically yes, trying to find us, but we moved a lot because he was trying to find us. So fun fact, to this day I am, believe it or not, no matter if I'm 6'4" or if I was tiny, I am scared of the dark. Now, you can put that 2 and 2 together with whatever you want to think about being scared of the dark is. I don't believe there's monsters, but the darkness is basically the unknown. When we look into the dark, we don't know what we see. So where that came from was, growing up, we were very religious, and we went to church. It felt like every night, but there was Wednesday night mass, Friday night mass, then Sunday day mass. So there was one mass that my mother and I went to. We had moved to Fremont recently, a nice house. And again, I remember like it was yesterday. I had was it 16-inch? Whatever the big records were. So the big LPs, vinyl. I had a Thriller, Michael Jackson. And I remember coming home. We came home from mass that night, and our apartment, or our home, had been broken into. And so my mom called the cops. She's hysterical. She's female. She's by herself. She has this young child. But the only thing they had stolen was the LP and some of my mom's jewelry. There was only one forced entry. So, at that point, we kind of figured that it was. They never found out who it was. We figured it was my father because he only took things that meant something to us. But what happened was the detectives had gone into my room, and at the time, my room had a closet. And this really dates me, but the doors were all glass. So they were sliding glass doors, and they had dusted the doors for fingerprints. So we never cleaned that glass off when I went to sleep that night. So now, being a young child, not only am I afraid of someone breaking into the house, but when I open my eyes, I see all these handprints and these fingerprints on these mirrors. And ever since that day, it's been kind of traumatizing to think of, someone was there or someone could be there. And that has brought my affinity to the darkness to this day. I mean, now I'm not, lying in bed like, oh my gosh, I'm in the dark, but I do need to this day, I need a light on. I swear to God, I need something on. To not have the darkness. It's just one of those things. But besides that, we moved a lot. Like I said, I'm trying to get away from my father. So that was pretty much the last, I guess, interaction until now. My aunt will tell a story, and I don't remember it because I didn't know what he looked like. So I was older now. And I was with her, and we were walking across the street, and she had bumped into someone, and it was him. But again, I didn't know who it was. They talked for a second, and then we just kept walking. So everything, like I said, all I've known up to this point is someone that didn't want anything to do with me, which is fine. I've come to terms with that, and I've process that, and that's okay, and I'm totally fine with that. Again, I wouldn't be where I am today without my mother, so yeah.
May I ask you something?
Sure.
So growing up at such a young age, knowing that, you know, a father figure being so important, not being around, you know, being raised by your mother, and I know your mom did everything she could for you. I know you said that you weren't spoiled, but you never went without because your mother will do everything she could. How did it make you feel knowing that, you know, at some point, because you guys were moving around a lot, how did it make you feel when you found out that at some point your father was trying to look for you guys, was trying to contact you guys?
It never really hit me until this past year, and that's something we'll get into later, but I had a lot of strong women around me that were the bedrock of who I am, who are the bedrock of who I am. Between the three of them, my grandmother, my mother, and my aunt, they were the ones who set the foundation for who I was going to be growing up. And it's the greatest thing now, especially as an adult, to look back on it, because my strength comes from what each of them did. And, you know, we talk about, especially in the climate we're in now, we talk about immigration and people coming over to be able to start a life and to live freely, because my mother didn't come over with, like, it was like, okay, you know, enjoy. My mother came over to escape what was over there, you know, in the Philippines. If anyone's ever been to the Philippines or you just see it, you know, sometimes what we see is a lot different when you go over there. The Philippines is beautiful, a beautiful country, but to really understand what a third world country is, where people are trying to make a living every single day by doing anything possible, that's what it is. So I totally understand that. But then to have the rest of the family come over, you know, I never got to meet my grandfather. He passed away before I was born. So again, everything that I had in my life was a female figure, but that didn't matter, because what they had to do was be even stronger for this boy that was now growing up in a world that didn't have a father figure. So everything that they did to come over, to start brand new, to start from scratch, and to, you know, it's really powerful to see and to know, and to still have them, at least my mother and my aunt in my life, to see what they do now. And it's just like, it's great to see, because, you know, I am my mother's child when I look back. And I think for years, honestly, and my mother's going to watch this and she's going to like be crazy about it, but for so many years, we butt heads on so many things, but that's because we are one and the same. It's true to form when I say I'm my mother's child. I am everything that she is, and a lot of our arguments come from us being the same exact person. So, you know, she can be proud of that. Not the argument she can be proud of, but being able to emulate herself into somebody, and to who he is as a person is definitely, you know, where I get everything from. So up to this point, you know, we had moved a couple times in California. Then I moved to Colorado. My mom now got a great job with Johns Hopkins for the university, not the hospital. So it was time to move to Baltimore. What people don't understand is I did move a lot. Between that moment of time to the time we moved to Randallstown, that had been the 13th stop, believe it or not, that we moved. And it was a big part of my life, because what I had found was I never got a place to set my roots. So what I found is as I got older, I found myself, attaching myself to people very easily because I never knew how long someone was going to be in my life. So especially like Colorado, it was for a year, to say at the most a year. So I was like, ooh, these people have to be, you're my best friend, because I didn't know how long they were going to be around. So that was a little traumatizing for me because I wanted to be everyone's friend. And where sometimes people look at that as like, oh, this guy just wants to be everyone's friend. Well, that comes from me not knowing how long someone's going to be in my life. So, you could say those are attachment issues, but it's kind of attachment issues in reverse, where some people can't get attached. I latch on very quickly. So we moved to Randallstown. If anyone's familiar in Baltimore, so Randallstown is in the county, affluent African-American area. So now I'm moving from Colorado, which was majority white, to now Randallstown, which is majority black. So now again, my brain as a kid is wondering, what is going on? Where do I fit into this? Because I knew one way, now I know another way. And this is where I really started to see my physical self. Everything up to this point for me had been mental. Because growing up as a kid, I would eat the McDonald's early in the morning, not think anything about it. I grew up as a kid actually skinny. It wasn't until I started getting a little bit older where, the cheeks started to fill in, I started to fill out a little bit more. But I never thought about the physical because I was such a happy kid. I was just okay with whatever was going on around me. So when I moved this time, now the physical started to come into play. Obviously that comes as we grow too, because you start to hit puberty and now your body's changing. So I remember going to Deer Park Elementary, and it was a magnet school. And I could walk to and from school. So there was a moment one time we were leaving school, me and my friends, and we got jumped by some high schoolers. Wasn't a really traumatizing time in my life. I didn't think anything about it. I was just kind of going with what everyone else was going with. Like it wasn't, I got home, I remember I was upset when I got home and I called my mother. So my daily life was, my mom was up, she was going to work, I was up, I was going to school. We went our separate ways. I would go to school. As soon as I got home, I would call her. To this day, I talk to my mother every single day. That's just a thing. That's our thing. So I would call her. And on this day, I remember calling her and I was upset, visibly shaken, but she couldn't see me. She could just hear me. But as any mother could, she heard it in my voice. And I remember I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to get those boys in trouble. Plus we didn't know who it was, but I didn't want to get them in trouble. And then but I remember my mom was so upset. And it was just another point in my life where it showed that my mom really had my back. No matter what I went through, whether she expressed it or not, she had my back. So it was just another one of those times where it was like, so yeah, I got beat up, but they were high schoolers. I was in elementary school and I was their size, but that's besides the point. But there was this point where the mental and the physical came together. I was walking home by myself and I was walking across the street and I remember someone yelled out the window like, "Hurry up, fat ass." And I remember, I didn't think about it. And then kind of as the hours went by, I did think about it. And I was like, that was kind of mean. Then I really started to look at myself differently. And I remember that's when I started to, when I would walk to school and walk home, I would walk with my head down, kind of in a shuffling motion. And so now, dealing with the hormones and the puberty, now this emotional side was starting to show up. The one who now started to care about what other people thought and how I was seen. Because up to that point, I had never seen myself as like fat or anything like that. I knew I was always the biggest person in the class. You know, when they say, oh, line up from tallest to shortest, and I was the one always in the front. So that made me feel good about myself, not also knowing that I probably was a little bit unhealthy and I was a little bit bigger than I should have been. Didn't think about it that way until that person actually said that. Not that it made me think of myself any less, but it really made the wheels start to turn on what I was, who I was. Because you don't really understand everything you'll never really understand what's going on in your life as a kid, because we don't have that mindset and we don't have that mental aptitude to put everything together to then process what's really going on. You know, for me, it could have been just another day passing, someone who's just rude, just saying that, and that was the end of it. But instead, for me, I start to overthink. And that has been my Achilles heel to this day, is where I start to overthink. Now I'm thinking about it. Okay, well, why did they say that? Why do when I look on TV, you know, there's these people out here who have abs and I don't have abs, or they're skinny and I'm not skinny, and that kind of thing. Or I was a very good bowler at the time and I was in a bowling league, but I wasn't built like these other people. So it definitely was a different time for me as far as the mental aspect, because now I was dealing with the physical and the mental and trying to get them to, I guess, say, align with the same kind of thought or the same process, but it just didn't work. And I attribute a lot of that to teenage angst. I really do. You know, again, not to overthink it. It's just one of those things that as a kid, you're just going with it, and you're going with what everyone else is doing. At least you're trying to. You know, I think that's a lot of what we see and what everyone goes through is some of us, we're just trying to go day by day because that's all that we can handle at the moment. So that's where I was at that point, because then my mom started to redate. And that was like, that was a very crazy time for me. Because up until this point now, it's only been me and my mother. And that's all I've ever known. So the last thing you want to do, especially with the male, I mean with the female as well, but with the male, is bring another male into this equation. Everything was fine. We were fine.
Did you have fear knowing that, you know, your whole life it was, you know, you and your mom, you know, she's always there for you. You guys talk every day. You know, your father hasn't been there. So that's just what you were used to, you and her. You know, it's like that's something that you know you could count on, you know?
Mm.
And then, you know, at some point, you know, like, did it scare you? Or like, how exactly did you feel when you knew the redating, or, you know, that was gonna be happening? Like, what were your thoughts going through at that time?
Well, the biggest thing, it was just that my mom was gonna get taken away.
Okay.
I think as an only child and with a single parent, our worst fear always is losing our parent, because that's all we've ever known. Even with other, you know, people in our lives, but you only have one mom, you only have one dad. And to have already lost per se, one of them, I was only down to one. So for now, someone to come into this, to then take that attention, and I'll be quite honest, to take my attention away from me to then have her attention focused on someone else I was like, we're not doing this. So my mom will probably kill me for telling the story, but there was a time she was dating someone, and I remember the guy, they went to dinner and the guy came back. And mind you, I was 12 or 13, so I was, I was
aware.
Yeah, I was aware. I was grown. But it wasn't like anything like that. They came back to watch a movie. I had gone into my closet upstairs and I stomped on the floor and banged on the floor until my mom had to come up and say something to me. To then at that point, that guy left and then they kind of broke it off. So it was very selfish of me at the time to think of only but of myself and not of my mother's feelings. Because again, up to this point, it had only been me and her. She had dated at times, but it wasn't anything to where, again, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what dating was. But now I'm aware of what's going on. You're in elementary school. You see other parents. And I had seen it happening in my life, and I said, I don't want this to happen. Now that affected our relationship for a little bit at that point. It is, I can't say it is what it is, because then that's going to sound selfish. Looking back on it, I feel extremely horrible for doing such a thing, but I think I did what only I knew to do. Because again, I didn't want to lose my mother. I didn't want to lose the only person pretty much who was on my side, who had my back. So it was one of those things. It was hard to recover from. We don't talk about it. It's kind of like one of those things that you're just like, it happened. But it definitely set the wheels in motion for, things now and where we are. I mean, we're fine now, but what I'm saying is like, if I wouldn't have done such a thing, would she be even happier now, having someone else and not being, by herself or single. So, looking back on it's upsetting because, I did that and it's probably not the best thing to do. But again, it was being attached and having only her and only knowing her. So, it's one of those things. So our time in Randallstown didn't last long. It was just a year. And then my mom was working with someone and she said she was selling her house. So we decided to move again and we moved to Dundalk. So I always tell people that when they ask me, well, where are you from? And I say, I'm from Baltimore by way of San Francisco, California. But if you want to get any deeper into it, I am from Dundalk, Maryland. If anyone is familiar with Dundalk, real small town, kind of very homey, right in the county. It's actually on the city-county line. But a lot of who I became as a person came from Dundalk. So I went to Holabird Middle School. Now, there were two middle schools. And this is where identity for me really played a part in who I've become as a person. So Holabird was one school, and then there was Dundalk Middle School. I grew up on the side of Holabird Middle School. So entering, I'm now one of 5 black kids in the school, my 6th grade year. So again, I'm going from one extreme to another extreme. And for me, it was okay. Because up to this point, I had excelled in my studies. My mom made sure that I was always doing my homework. I was on my classwork. So I was doing very, very well. So anytime for me that I could shine, so where I could be different, I reveled in that because it was a time for, and I guess you can say the attention was on me. That's how I thought as I was younger. I don't look at things like that now, but looking back, I can honestly say that that's what I thought, but not knowing the differences of really what it was. So being one of 5 black kids, I remember every Tuesday we had a meeting, all 5 of us, and I was the only boy. There was 4 girls and 1 boy, me, and we would have our diversity talks, and we would talk about our blackness. I had no idea what was going on because, like I said, growing up, I can't say I didn't identify with my black side, but I didn't know. To me, it was just a color, and I never really even saw that until I got to Randallstown. Where I was around, the majority was black. So now going back into majority white, I almost felt comfortable because that's what I was used to growing up. So now having this talk about diversity and our blackness, I guess it was their attempt to try and make us feel comfortable. Me being oblivious to everything that it was, I had no idea. But I took part in it. I guess they made us they took us out of class for it, so they definitely made us do it. But that's where I forged a lot of friendships that I still have today. I became best friends with a lot of people. Kyle Sabisky was a good friend of mine. I remember Kyle specifically because I remember our 8th grade year, my 8th grade graduation. My mother now had taught me how to shave, only shaving her legs, but she had taught me how to shave because at this point I was getting full-grown beards and I was having facial hair, and I did not like it at all because I was like, I'm in 7th grade and people don't even have facial hair. So she had to teach me how to shave, but I remember it was our 8th grade graduation and I didn't know how to tie a tie, and my mom didn't know how to tie a tie. So I remember Kyle and Kyle's dad came over, and Kyle's father actually helped me tie my tie. So I'm very grateful for that. And I still have that tie to this day. A teacher gave it to me, and I wore it for my 8th grade graduation. And my grandmother was there, because now my grandmother is getting older. She would stay with us for like half the year, and then the other half she would go back to California and live with my aunt. So it was good to have, my mom there, my aunt there. I had met also my great group of best friends. There's a circle of us, my friends BJ, Scott, and Chris. We pretty much grew up together, and we still talk every day now. We're basically brothers, so I'm thankful for that. But middle school was a good time. I always ask, people always ask you, especially in high school, like, if you could go back to any grade, what grade you would go back to? And I would always jump to middle school, because for me, middle school was like, it was, we had dances, we had lock-ins, and we just had a lot of fun. But again, not knowing really what was going on. I look back on things now and I think about how oblivious I was to the things going on around me, because I was happy. I was fine. I was okay. Like nothing was ever bad for me. Again, not knowing the struggles that my mom was either going through or had gone through, because everything for me was good. So, you go through middle school, and middle school is a good time. Then you graduate and you go to high school. Well, now the two schools, Holabird Middle School and Dundalk Middle School, were now going to combine. So that's where my brain exploded. So Holabird was majority white, Holabird Middle School. Dundalk Middle School was majority black. They now poured into Dundalk High School, and now you are at 50-50. And now I'm really seeing the change. And now it was really trying to find my space of where I fit in to all of this. I can't say high school was a tough time for me, but it was definitely an eye-opening experience for me. There was a lot of things I struggled with in high school, really trying to fit in. It was almost like you carry that middle school mentality in to high school, but you really can't, because it was so far ahead. I always struggled with the fact that, I always got it. People always ask me, they were like, well, you talk white, or you don't sound like us. And I had to struggle with that. But then on the other end, I wasn't white enough for the white people, but I wasn't black enough for the black people. So it was, I tried to, not to say that I tried to stay to myself, because I never did that. I was very involved. I played football. I was in the SGA. I played tennis. I tried to play basketball. I played basketball 1 year, my JV year. So I tried to keep myself busy. But there were so many things going on in my life that I just couldn't keep up. But I always tried to maintain the demeanor, the happiness that people always got from me. Because up to this point, I was always the jolly, fat guy, the good guy. Can't really make him mad. We're trying to make him mad, but he won't get mad. It was just a lot. It really was. And I'm thankful for a few people in my life during the high school time. But understand this, that I was never really a talker. Even doing something like this, it doesn't pain me now, but I've never wanted to be in front. As much as growing up, I enjoyed that. What I realized was that all that time wanting to do that was just my kind of cry of, I just want someone to be my friend, or to like me, really. So in high school, I tried to maintain that with doing all those things and trying to be a part of all those clubs and all those sports. Whereas in middle school, I forged some friendships that I have today. Definitely in high school is where a lot of friendships came from, and job opportunities. And my mentor, my father figure, my head coach, Eric Weber, was a big part of my life. Even later on, he was just my coach in high school, but I looked up to him. I look up to him like a father. We still talk today. He gave me my first coaching opportunity. So, there's a lot of things from high school that I took away that were good, some negative, but I look at it as part of the growth process. And I'll be the first to admit to say, yeah, I wish I knew some of the things I knew now back then, but why? Why would I want that? Because then I would have never learned what I was learning then to get me to this point. It's one of those things that you kind of have to go trial by fire. And I think that's the misconception, is sometimes because I always carried a smile on my face, people always thought that everything was always good, but it really wasn't. You know, it never really was. You know, I did what I had to do to go through those years. I enjoyed it, but I did what I had to do. You know, I graduated top 5% of my class. I was 5 out of 382. You know, I was tasked with making a hard decision. And I like telling the story, especially when I coached to my football guys. So I was recruited by a whole bunch of schools. Our football team was tremendous. I got the privilege of playing varsity my sophomore year. Freshman year, I played JV. My goodness, it was the roughest year ever. I hated football. I hated my coaches. I hated everything about it. And this was back in the day when football was football. So every Friday or Thursday, it wasn't pregame, but every Thursday, they would take the JV, because we practiced on a different field and varsity practiced down on the field below. They would take us and we would be the scout team. So we would be the other team that they were playing. And there was nothing scout about it. We were just lambs to the slaughter. And I remember I have some scars on me from just getting beat up. But again, it was one of those things. It was you kind of were bred into that, and that's what made you better later on. So I remember our coaching staff those years. They were fun. They were energetic. All good guys. You know, they told me like it was back then. I never believed it because I thought I was better than really what I was. As I got into coaching and seeing players and player development and training guys, I look back at my film and I was like, gosh, you're terrible. Like your footwork is terrible. And it's true. I think it was John Simpson. He was my JV coach. He was like, you just get in the way. You know, I was 6'4", 315 pounds. That's all I had to do didn't really have to block. I just had to get in the way. So, you know, but back then I thought I was a star. I thought I was the greatest thing ever. But I had the privilege of playing varsity my sophomore year, and we were so good. So by our senior year, there was at least 4 or 5 of us getting recruited. I mean, there was a whole bunch of people being recruited as the years went on, but I know our senior year, there was at least 4 or 5 of us get recruited. And so I was looking at a couple schools. Towson had come in and given us, there was me, Keith Barnes, a running back, and Derek Breedlove, a tight end, defensive end. Towson had came in and offered us, all 3 of us, at least 75%, if I'm not mistaken, of a ride. So books, tuition, all that. And I remember the day that the coach left. He had asked each and every one of us, you know, what other schools we were looking at, and gone down the line, and he got to me. So I was really big into Western Maryland. I liked the small school type feel. I was big into that. I liked Dartmouth, Ivy League school, but then at the end of the day, my mom couldn't afford $40,000 a year for being the cheapest Ivy League school. And then Maryland. Maryland hadn't recruited me at all, hadn't even taken a look at me, but for some reason, I just wanted to go to the state school. So I rattled off my schools, and the last school I said was Maryland to the coach. And the coach looked at me, and he laughed. He said, Maryland? He said, you'll never play at Maryland. And that was it. And I was like, oh, okay. And at that moment, I decided that I was going to go to Maryland, and I said, fuck Towson. And I still stand by that to this day. There are some days where I'm like, man, if I would have just went to Towson, just taken the money and just gone, maybe I'll still be playing. But then things wouldn't have worked out the way they did. So I ended up going to Maryland. I had chosen that. But before we graduated, there was an unfortunate incident that happened. I had never dealt with death in my life up to this point. So I remember like it was yesterday. It was March 13th, 2002. It was Senior Teach Day. So I was the principal for that day. And so we had walkie-talkies. And one of our classmates, a teammate, had left and had gone and robbed a store. So the owner was there that day, that time, and shot him, and he died. And, you know, it's one of those things because you never see it coming. I remember it was 2 weeks prior. Derek and I had a very interesting relationship. We were always hot and cold, especially on the football field. You know, he was a tight end, I was a tackle. He was a star, I was a star below him. So for me, I always saw it as competition. Healthy competition because, you know, that's what makes us better. But competition as such. And it wasn't until we stopped playing football as we were going throughout the year that our relationship got closer. I remember telling him if he ever needed anything, and there were plenty of people. Derek was the nicest kid, one of the greatest human beings I've ever met as a person. I remember a time that, and this is how, you know, our head coach really made an impact in our life. We were going to a game, and Derek was nowhere to be found. Like, it was a big game, so we were like, you know, where's Derek? I remember someone had said, you know, he's watching his brother and sister. So Webb was like, well, you know, we kind of need Derek. I mean, not that we need him, but it'd be good to have him. And so I remember we took the bus, we left school. We took the bus to Derek's house. We got Derek. We got his little brother and sister. They were about 4 or 5. I remember Webb sat with them in the front. And, you know, that's who Webb was as a person. And his brother and sister watched us play that game. I think it was Parkville. Watched us win that game. And, you know, Derek was a family guy. It was just... You never want to go through that, especially as a high schooler. It was tough, and it kind of... I never really knew how to deal with death because, like I said, up to this point, I never had to deal with it. So a lot of this time, there was a lot of grieving. So what I felt in my nature was I remember going over this girl's house, Jill, where everyone was at, and just kind of like trying to help console and trying to be the strong person in this all, while still trying to all make it make sense. It was a tough time for the school, for the neighborhood. There were a lot of racial issues with that. Yeah, so it was definitely interesting because you only, sometimes we get caught up in thinking about what our lives would have been if we would have done something different. You know, I think back sometimes like what his life would have been if he would have just done something different. But, you know, it's one of those things. So we get to graduation, and I remember graduation like it was yesterday. It was at CCBC, Dundalk, in the gym. It was hot, everyone's sweating, and I remember they called my name. My grandmother was there, my mother was there. Get my diploma, sit down, and I opened it up and I looked at it and I said, well, what now? Because this whole time, I think there's this conception, this misconception that this whole time we're supposed to know what the plan is, what we're supposed to do. You know, up until this point, we had guidance counselors who were leading us on this path of, okay, we're going to go to college, and then we're going to graduate from college, and then we're going to be great, and we're going to get into the workforce. Teachers pushing us to be the best we can be, but after that point, they're no longer there. Yes, they're there for support, but that whole time they just push, and then it's the baby bird now being let out to fly on their own. So I was really lost at that moment, because I was like, okay, well, I know I'm going to Maryland. I wanted to play football. But that was it up until that point. I saw what my coach had did for me, and I really wanted to do that. So I knew I wanted to get into education. So, that summer was interesting because I didn't get accepted to the fall semester at Maryland. That was heartbreaking. I'm not going to say how I got in, but I got in. My principal worked some magic, but I got in either way. But I got to Maryland, and I walked on. I was the only freshman to walk on. There was 3 of us. There was, they had their tryouts, and I was one of 3 people to make the team as a walk-on, which is amazing. I had the worst tryout ever. My bench press was terrible. My 40 was terrible. My vertical jump, I know, it was just really, really bad. And I remember at the end of the tryout, the coach was like, we'll get back to you. We'll let you know. So a week goes by, don't hear anything. Another week goes by, don't hear anything. I was the type of person that if, I needed to know something, I was going to go to the source. So I called, and he wasn't in. So I left a message. I said, hey, I don't know if you guys are still deciding or the decisions have been made, but I haven't been told anything. I really think that I could be something for this program if you just give me the chance. So I hung up. It was that night, because I remember I went for a walk. I got a call. I wasn't home, or I wasn't in my dorm room, and he left a message. So I remember getting the message and saying, hey, Thomas, we'd love to have you on the team. That's all I heard. He could have said anything else in the world. All I heard is, welcome to the team. And I dropped the phone. I remember running through the dorm, screaming up and down. I remember my friend who was across the hall from me had put on his AIM, his AOL Messenger. His away message was like, I now live, across the hall from a University of Maryland football player. So it was the greatest thing in the world. Now I'm going to mention something, and my friends are going to give me flack for this, my best friends. So before I went to Maryland, I always told people that I was going to play for Maryland. No one believed me. So before I went, as a Christmas gift, BJ, Chris, I forgot who else, but I know those 2, and they still have it. I bought Maryland footballs, and I signed them with my name. And I said, here you go. This is my Christmas gift to you, because when I get famous, this is going to be worth something. Might have seen it in a movie. I was projecting it. So that was that. But they still give me shit to this day about it, because they're like, Chris's parents actually have the football. It's in their whole basement's like Maryland Raven stuff. And the football's still there, which means a lot to me. They're great people, but I love seeing it there. But I still get shit about this football all the time, because, obviously I didn't keep playing football, but that's besides the point. So I make the team, and now I'm scared, because here I talked all this stuff, and now I got to perform. So I started in the winter. And winter conditioning, if anyone has ever been through a Division I football process before, it's like hell months, because you're just running and you can't run outside. So they put us in the armory. So it was a big gym. We had 4 stations. We did this for about an hour and a half. One station was duck walks. Another station was like jumping over bags. Another station was sprints. And then another station I think was like abs or something. Or no, sorry, one station was push the wall. So you would just stand up against the wall and then you just push it. He did that for an hour and a half for like a month. And mind you, I'm scared because I have no idea. But I get through it. Couldn't believe it. I remember the first day of real practice, spring practice. So I go to Bird Stadium, the Gossett Team Football House, which is amazing now, but back then it was cool back then, but it's nothing like it is now. And I get all my stuff. And this is everything that I've dreamed of up to this point, or so I thought. Guy gives me all my equipment and he shows me this little locker and he's like, so you put all your training stuff in this mesh bag, you throw it in this locker, it'll get washed for you, and then you come back to the locker and you take it out and it's all washed. Now let me take you to your main locker. So I'm like, oh my gosh, main locker. Like I have a little locker and then a main locker. And here it was, like I'm now in a Division I football program that someone had told me that I couldn't do. I'm now here. Without saying, it was one of the toughest things that I ever did. I was not mentally prepared for it. Forget the physical, because the physical aspect would have came with it later on. But mentally, I wasn't prepared for that. Everything that I thought I'd wanted to do was really just kind of this made-up dream. I think part of it was trying to live up to an expectation of, well, your dad did it, so now you have to do it. So I get through a couple practices and I tell myself, like, this is not it. Like, I can't do this. I was like, no. So I remember the first person I called wasn't my mother. So I called my coach. And I said, hey, Webb, can I talk to you for a second? Sure. Said, hey, I'm thinking about quitting the football team. He said, okay. I said, I really don't want to because I don't want to let you down. And I remember him saying, it's not about me or him. He said, it's about what you feel is right for you. If it's something, you're doing something and it doesn't make you happy, you don't have to do it. Don't think that you're disappointing us back home, because at the end, this is your dream. If this is something that you've always wanted to do, then you go and do it. But if you're hanging on because you want us to be happy about it, there's no point in doing it. So I remember I sat in it for a little bit. I really had to sit and think about it. I ended up leaving the football program. So I ended up walking away from what I thought was my dream, and I let loose. So up to this point, up until my senior year of high school, my mother, like I said, was very strict on my routine. Wake up, go to school, come home, do your homework, eat dinner, go to bed. I had a bedtime my senior year. Granted, my bedtime was the time that I had to be in my room. So my senior year got to 10 p.m. But I had to be in the house, in my room by 10 p.m. That's all I had known up to this point. Now I'm in a place where there's no one to tell me when to wake up, when to go to class, when to do my work, and what time to go to sleep. And now I'm not playing football, so I'm not really thinking about my grades. And that was it. It was... And you know what? I don't think I'll ever be able to live down that moment in my life. But for me, it's not a regrettable moment. When I say I let loose, I was at a party every single night from Sunday to Saturday. I mean, I became well known in Maryland. Beer pong, people called me the finisher because I could, toss it in one cup very easily. So that was a good time, but it didn't advance me And it actually set me back. But again, when you look back on things, we now fully understand why we had to go through this stuff in order to get to where we are now. It dropped my GPA down very low. So I left Maryland with a 1.27. Yeah, 1.27. So that's what I had to pick up with later on when I got back into school. So while I was at Maryland, I had come back one time and seen my coach had left Dundalk and went to Sparrows Point High School and started coaching again. Because he had retired for a little bit. He did like the Jordan retirement. He went away. He didn't do anything else, but he went away for like a year or two and then found himself at another school. So I had visited the school when I was still at Maryland. And it was during the summertime, and I was like, wow, this is great. And that is what started the ball rolling for me coaching. I started helping him a little bit. I was able to watch a couple games. So he brought me on as an assistant. So with me leaving Maryland, I say leaving, they'll say kicked out, but we can, agree to disagree, whatever. I lost all my scholarships, everything that I got from high school. So I now was essentially broke to go to school. So I had to work. So I started subbing at that school, and then I started coaching and started helping him out. And that's where I found my love of football. Where this entire time I thought my love of football was playing the game and being that person, it was actually in the development and the coaching aspect that I found the true love for football. So I started helping him out. He made me an assistant coach, and that brought my eyesight to now my goal is to become a head coach. That is the thing that I want to do. So that's what I did, and that's what I worked on. That's what I tried to get better because I always wanted to be him. I now found this person who was my father figure. So this entire time up to this point, I not wanted to be my father, but as far as the playing aspect, any person who plays football, I can't say any because I can't speak for everybody, but most young boys, young men who play football, they go through Pee Wee, they go through high school, they go through college. Their goal is to play in the NFL. And then to have your father, to have someone in the family that had played in the NFL, you kind of want to carry on that legacy. So that's what I had up until this point. But then now I see this guy like leading people so well, and like, because I was under him as a player, so now I work for him, and I'm like, this is even better to see him on the other side of it. Because where I saw him as a coach is a lot different when you see him as a co-worker. So as a player, the player-coach relationship is a lot different than a coach-to-coach relationship. Our relationship moved past that well beyond my graduation. So we were already close as it is. But then now to work with him was the most amazing thing that I've ever seen. And I owe everything coaching-wise that I ever learned and ever did to that man. So I'm very grateful for that. So, I come back, didn't live with my mom. I lived in an apartment with my best friends. And a couple of years go by. And now I'm big into coaching. I love it. It's the greatest thing in the world. My grandmother started to get sick. She was getting older. Up to this point, my grandmother had some health issues that we always dealt with, like heart attacks and strokes. So she was getting older. So I remember it was one summer, 2005, I can't really remember the year. I tried to push the year out of my brain, honestly. She got really sick. She was in the hospital. And my mom went back to California to see her in the hospital. And I remember my mom was really mad at me because I didn't go. So I was getting ready for our annual like summer camp, fall camp, to get ready for the season. So we always go away. We always went away for camp, for football, to get the team ready. So my grandmother was in the hospital, and my mom, I remember she called me, and she was like, I don't think she's going to make it. So I said, okay, I'll fly out. I'll miss camp. I'll fly out. They'll be fine. They'll, Webb will understand. And I remember she was about to say something, and my grandmother wanted to talk to me. And so my grandmother gets on the phone, and she said, we said our Hayes, and how are you doing? And to her, she was fine. And I said, I'm gonna be out. I'm gonna come out. I'll be out this weekend. She said, no, I don't want you to come out. I said, no, it's just camp. I don't, it's fine. They'll understand. And she said, no. She said, you're doing what you love to do, so I want you to stay. And the next day, she passed away, and I wasn't there. And to this day, it still does hurt, because I don't know. Like, I feel like I should have been there. She called me every birthday, and saying happy birthday, whether I picked up the phone or not. She would sing it, on my voicemail. I don't get that anymore. It was tough, and I internalized that a lot, and I dealt with it, but I dealt with it my own way. I never really put on, or I never really cried. I remember going back. So her wish was to be buried back in the Philippines. So I said, I'm, definitely doing that. So I remember flying out to California and seeing everybody. And it never really hit me until I walked into her apartment. And I remember walking in and seeing things, because we had talked before she went in the hospital, because she was going to move back in with my aunt. And I was like, oh, well, I want the, the magic bullet. I want this stuff. She would give me whatever I wanted. Instead of giving me stuff that she had, she would just buy me new stuff. And I remember seeing all that stuff and just being like, and I remember walking in, and I had to walk back out. And I couldn't deal with it. I really couldn't. It was a lot. It was, she was just, when I talk about my mother being there for everything, she was there for everything. Like, she was a second mother. She was my grandmother. She was, she was, that was her. She was the nicest lady ever. She would wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, sit downstairs in the dark, and read her Hail Marys, pray for me every day, be my biggest cheerleader. I mean, she'd be I know she's happy now. She sees everything that I do. I think, a lot of her philanthropy has been passed on to me. Just being able to, trying to at least help people. So that was my next experience in the Philippines, was to go back. And anyone who understands Filipino culture, there's a couple things they do differently. So, I don't look like the average Filipino. I'm not 5'5" or 5'6", 140 pounds. So the first thing is you wear black. You have to wear all black for 7 days. So we flew over. Now, I'm not a flyer. I hate flying. I really do. To this day, I hate flying. It's just nerve-wracking for me. That's a 15-hour flight. And I remember not falling asleep one single bit. I would not. Now, we were on an Airbus, which was amazing. I've never been on an Airbus before, a double-decker plane. But I would get up, walk around. We had like 3 meals. I think we had like 4 meals. I don't even remember. But yeah, I didn't sleep one bit. So we're wearing all black. And I have long sleeves and pants on. You can't wear shorts. You can't wear short sleeve. And when you get to Manila, especially during the summertime, so it was around July, August, it's hot. It's muggy. It's the air is dense. And I'm a big guy, and I'm just sweating. So I step off the plane, and now everyone's looking at me like, who is this NBA player or NFL player? But I really got to see, for the first time in my life, I really got to see where at least part of me was from. Yeah, I had been back when I was a baby, but I wouldn't remember that. Now I'm an adult. And I can somewhat take in what I'm seeing. Now, within the circumstances I'm grieving, I could care less what's going on around me. But, I got to see where my family was from. And I got to see where my uncle lives now. And see all that and see how people live. And it made me appreciate more, what my grandmother did, what my mother did, what my aunt has done, what they've all did or do to be successful, especially coming from what they came from. I look at that time in my life as it was a good time. Obviously, my grandmother's passing is not a good moment in my life, but for her to be okay with it being her time, it eases the pain. We all want to be selfish when someone passes away because we'll never get that time back with them. But if they are happy, if they are okay with where they are and what they've done up to that point in their life, there's nothing that we could want anymore. She wasn't suffering. She wasn't in pain. She wanted the pain to stop. And she did. And that makes me feel a little bit better. My coach used to say, when we would lose a game, he would say, a little piece of you dies, because you put so much into it. I remember when my grandmother passed away, obviously a big piece of me died. But from that, a different piece was born, and it made me actually a lot stronger, because I know that, like I said, in everything that I do now, she would be so happy in that. Yeah. So losing my grandmother was a big hole in me. But like I said, I had now replaced that hole with something much larger that really drove me to be the best person I could be. And with that, I always strive to be, whatever I'm doing at that moment, I always strive to be the best at that, no matter what it is that I'm doing. So now I'd found this love for coaching. I said, I want to be the best assistant coach I can be to then lead me to be a head coach. And I always remember my my coach at the time, always telling me, he said, I will let you know when you're ready. That would frustrate me sometimes because I always felt, and I have this now, so I have the real problem of impatience. I'm not a patient person, but when we understand that there's a process to everything, we have to be patient with the process that we're going through. But he would always tell me, he said, when you're ready, I'll let you know when you're ready. So I remember it got to like my 5th or 6th year as an assistant. I'd be like, all right, I think I'm ready. And this is, mind you, this is after going to meetings with him, and I was now doing the schedule for the entire county. Just doing a whole bunch of stuff, helping him order, so inventory. So I was like helping put together practice schedules. I think I got it. I'm like, okay, I'm ready now. He's like, not yet. You're not ready yet. So I remember it would go on, and it got to the point where he then stepped down. So we knew that one year was going to be his last year. And I'm like, oh, I don't have a backup plan. I don't know what's going to happen now, because without him, again, I felt like I was losing someone that had my back through this whole thing. So I remember contemplating if I was going to go back with that staff the next year. And I remember the head coach coming in at the time. Glenn Emery was the JV coach, so he was becoming the new varsity coach. And he called me one summer, or that summer after the final year, and he said, "Hey, someone's not coming back. I'd love for you to be the offensive coordinator." So I was like, okay. So now I have the plan in the next step. I was just a regular assistant coach. I coached quarterbacks and did special teams. So now being an offensive coordinator, I was like, great. This is the next step. So I did that, and there's 3 schools in Dundalk. So there's Dundalk, Sparrows Point, and Patapsco. I had went to Dundalk, played at Dundalk. Now I'm coaching at Sparrows Point. After that year was fine. It was great. All my years coaching, I always had fun. It became stressful later on in my life, as I'll say, but it was always fun for me. Coaching for me is my happy place besides the gym. So as that year ended, I was looking now to move on. I remember talking to Webb, and he had said, I think you're ready. You can look. Obviously he was gone, so I could go look. The head coach at Patapsco was kind of looking for, not for a way out, but he was getting towards the end. So we had talked. He said, I might have an opportunity for you, so let's chat. So we chatted. He was like, come on and be my offensive coordinator, and then when I want to leave next year, we'll just kind of the transition to you. Perfect. Obviously, things don't work like that. You need to go through an interview process and all that. But I go on anyways. So now I leave Sparrows Point to go to Patapsco, another rival school. They were all rivals. All 3 of them never liked each other. So now I've worked at 2. I played at 1. Craziness. So I remember that year. It was a really exciting year because it was a new environment for me. Had a whole bunch of different players that I didn't have before at Sparrows Point. And I was working for someone brand new. I had knew Spencer through the coaching circuit, but I never knew him personally. So we really got to know each other. It was a good time. I had a great time being his offensive coordinator. So I remember year ended, we went 1-9, I believe it was, or 0-10. So up to this point, Patapsco had been 1-19. So I told the athletic director I'd love to be the next head coach. So we have to go through the process and all that. We get through that. I'm now named the new head varsity football coach at Patapsco High School. So for me, I had finally reached that mountaintop that all this time that I had been working for. And especially during that time, I was like, I know my grandmother would really be proud because all that hard work had now come to fruition. To say the least, the first year was rough. We went 0-10 my first year. And it was eye-opening. Everything that I thought it would be was and wasn't. Now I got to see everything as a head coach. So as an assistant, you show up at your time that you show up. You do the things necessary for the position that you take care of. But now as a head coach, you have to be that conductor of everything. I took my job very seriously. If we had games on the weekend, JV was at 10 and the varsity would play at 1. I was at the school at 7. Some kids would show up. But I remember going through that first year of 0-10 and thinking to myself, I don't know what to do. But again, I had been faced with this as an assistant. I had seen my coach at Sparrows Point turn a program around from a 40-year losing streak, 40-game losing streak to actually winning games and being really, really good. So I said, okay, you know what? We're just going to do the same thing. So I got a lot of the plans from his formula, his format. So 0-10 was not learning how to win, but learning how to lose. And that was really hard for me because all I've ever known was winning. So when you explain to people we had to learn how to lose, they kind of look at you kind of weird, like, oh, you lose. No, learning how to lose is not, talking and laughing on the bus after you just got thumped. Learning how to lose wasn't just going back to practice the next day and working the same way that you did the week before. It was now working even harder to then become better. Bus rides weren't so jovial now after we lost a game. People took it seriously. And I remember getting mad after a game and they're like, wow, he's really mad about this. Like, he's taking it seriously. And I remember that team, I told those seniors and they came back, some of them came back and coached for me. And they understood finally what I said when I said, you may not think it now, but you will understand that you are now laying the foundation for what is to come and what is to grow from this program. So that 0-10 year was really what set us up for the success to come later on. I remember then my second year, we went 4-6. The third year, we went 6-4. And then that fourth year, we really hit the jackpot and went 9-1. That year was tremendous. It's fun is not even the word to use because it was exhilarating. Every game was fun and exciting. There were games in there that were really a battle. But when I say that, it wasn't just me. It was all the coaches. And I tell people all the time, I didn't do anything. As a head coach, people think you do a lot. I just showed up, unlocked the gates, and let the coaches do the work. Let the players play the games. And they did an amazing job. And it just goes on your win-loss record. That's what we do as head coaches. And that's where I really found like a lot of the fun was just being able to build and to grow. As head coaches, especially of young men, my biggest goal, and I learned this from my coach, was that, I didn't want football to be their number one answer. It might have been a dream of mine when I was younger to go to the NFL, but you had to have a backup plan. And I told my guys, I always told them, I said, as long as you become a successful member of this society, in whatever you do, that's a true achievement right there. You go into college, You graduate, you continue to play football, great. You go on to college, you graduate, and you don't play football, and you get a great job, great. Let's say you don't go to college, but you get into a great profession, a good trade, and you're successful, great. That's what I cared about, was seeing these boys turn into young men. And that's a lot of what I took from what I did. I talk to a lot of my guys nowadays, and I just check in on them to make sure they're fine. Sometimes they check in on me to make sure I'm fine. And then that's what I did it for, was for them. Those guys were great. Like I said, I made it a point, and I always had a player with me, Aldrin. I would get up at 3 on game days, 3 in the morning, kind of get my mind together. I would get him around 4 o'clock in the morning, and we would be setting the field up at 4:30 in the morning for a 10 o'clock game, a 10 o'clock JV game. A lot of people don't understand what I did, what a lot of us did to build that program up. A lot of behind-the-scenes things were done. In 2015, after the year, we went 5-5. New schedule. It's a lot tougher, but I was really excited because a lot of the guys that I had were juniors, so they were going into their senior year, 2016. I was really upset. I wasn't asked to come back as head coach. And that was really upsetting for me because I had felt that everything that we had put into that program up to that point was kind of being dismantled. For whatever the reason, it is what it is. We did what we had to do at that time to make us successful. And if that was me showing up at 4 a.m. and then not leaving until 6 o'clock p.m. the same day, that's what it was. And that's where I really found out that coaching was my life. I think sometimes we get caught up in our plans. A lot of people have a plan for themselves. And I wholeheartedly believe in plans and in what we set out to do for ourselves. But we have to understand that there's something far greater than our own plan that is a plan made for us. If it is meant to be, it will be. If it's not meant to be, it will not be. And I always found, I thought coaching was, I was like, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to coach in high school. I'm going to coach in college. And I'm going to coach in the pros. Maybe, possibly. But then at any moment's notice, it could be just snatched away from us. And it was. And again, for another moment in my life, something was snatched away from me. And it sunk me into a really deep and dark hole. A lot of people, they'll know me as, especially after my coaching days, they'll know me as the fun guy, the guy who likes to have a lot of fun. He gets drunk, that type of thing. But no one really knows how deep it does go. I never sought help or went to meetings or anything like that. But I would drink, and I would drink to excess. Now, I was doing this before, coaching. I left coaching. College, you do it in college. And I was a big guy. I thought I could just drink until I got drunk. But as I got older, there was a pattern that was happening. Where some people find food, they find comfort in food. Some people find comfort in alcohol. I'm not saying that every time I had a problem, I would run to a drink. But there were definitely times where drinking, I felt, helped ease a little bit of what was going on at the time. So leaving coaching was a really dark time for me because it exposed my mindset at that moment. And I remember a couple friends asking me, like, is everything okay? Are you good? Hey, it's just one of those things. You just drink on weekends and it's a good time. But drinking to the point of excess, to the point of blackouts, to blacking out in your car in front of a 7-Eleven and not waking up till the next morning you have to go to work, kind of thing, I knew something was wrong. And I always had this, not argument with my mother, but I know she knew something was wrong because it always became a thing where I had to have a drink or I had to go out. And I think for her, her now past and my past and present were coming together. So a big fear, I think, for her, and I realize now, was that she didn't want me to turn out like my father. My father had, like I said, had a very big issue with drugs and alcohol. So now she saw this becoming an issue and possibly another path that I was going down. So it was definitely a self-realization moment that I had to get through. It took years. It really did. And anyone who knows me knows that I liked to drink. Like I really did. And there was never a time when it was just going to be 1 or 2 drinks or just socially drink, casually drink. It was drink to the point that I just got so drunk. And it was very ignorant of me to then also get behind a wheel and to then drive, because I've seen situations, I've known of situations, and I've been the lucky one where I've never got into a wreck and nothing ever happened bad. I've driven up on curbs and things like that, and I remember I would wake up the next morning being like, I can't believe you just did, like, what if someone was walking there? And I just had to check myself. You know, I was never the person to seek out help. And maybe that's where some of the issues lie. Maybe I could have. I now have kind of forced myself to self-do it and to self-talk. But it was just something that I went through, and it was definitely not pretty. But again, what grows from the darkness sometimes can be a beautiful thing, because now I see myself in a different space, a different light. You know, like I said, leaving coaching was one of the hardest things I had to do. And I bounce around jobs every now and then, or back then I had 3 different jobs in 3 years. Because I was trying to find what I was good at. I only knew coaching. And now that had been taken away from me, I didn't know what I was good at. So, you know, I had to work through that process and figure out what it was. So as I jumped around jobs after coaching, I remember I finally landed a job. I wasn't really looking for it, but I had hit up my friend Tim. He was working at a gym, and I said, you know, why not? Why not work at a gym? And I got into the gym, and to say it changed my life is a lot, because a lot of things change our lives, but it was definitely a big piece of the puzzle that I'm currently putting together now. Ever since I was a little kid, I always wanted to help people. I remember, you know, they ask you when you're like really small, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I always said I wanted to be a doctor. Why do you want to be a doctor? Because I wanted to help people. So then that changed into, I want to be a coach, I want to be a teacher, but I'm still doing the same thing. I'm helping people. So then when I started working in the gym at the Maryland Athletic Club back in Baltimore, I started to see what my life was. So if I rewind a little bit and I go back to high school and I really think about what I was thinking about at the time. So here I was growing up, trying to deal with who I was as a person and what I saw myself as. So I always tell people, being 36 now, I didn't understand my blackness until I was about 31 or 32 because I wasn't ever really exposed to it. Yeah, I'd lived in Baltimore, or I'd went to, Dundalk, or I'd met people of different walks of life, but I never really related to it because I wasn't in that. I have conversations now where, people are like, well, did you ever look at any HBCUs? I didn't even know what an HBCU was. So I never really understood it. But now being able to identify with that. And then really, I think my biggest thing was my faith. And when I talk about faith, it's not being over religious or talking about, being this overtly religious person, but it's just really understanding how the world around me works and what me as one singular person means to this whole world. There's a lot of things that go on every single day, but there's only one thing that we can control, and that is ourselves. So really understanding my cog in this overarching theme of my faith. So when I was able to put everything together, I got my job at the gym, and I was a membership rep. So I sold memberships to people. And the wheels really then got to turning about who I was as this person. And it became more than just helping people. So it's one thing to sell a person a membership to a gym to say, here, you're now a member of this club. But it was really about finding out their why. And that's important because in doing so, I was able to find out my why. And being able to help people find their own is the most amazing thing possible. Because in doing that, it helps you uncover or unlock little pieces about yourself that you never even knew that you had. So this whole time where people were like, oh, okay, well, you just sell memberships. And I told people there's a little bit more than that, but they wouldn't understand because they weren't in there when I would speak to these people. For me, it was more than just the gym. It was an environment. It was a feeling. It was something that I got or started to get when I really ramped up in the gym myself. It was being able to know and to be confident in who I was, no matter what I looked like or what I was doing. One of the hardest things I ever did, I said, was playing Maryland football. I found that to be very false when I tried to do a bodybuilding competition. And I got the inspiration from my best friend BJ, who had been in one. And I was like, well, I want to do it. So I was like, oh yeah, I just lift a little bit here and there, do a little diet. It was so hard. And it wasn't the physical aspect that was hard, but the mental aspect. Telling myself every day that I had to be disciplined in what I ate and in what I did. Being intentional with everything that I did throughout the day was the hardest part, because up to that point, things had now spiraled out of control where I was just trying to live day by day and try to figure out what was I going to do next. So in working there, I really found out a lot about myself because I then was able to see myself in the people that came into my office. Whether they were dealing with a bad back, a restarted fitness journey. Because everyone gets on a fitness journey, but then they stop and they get going again, and then they stop and then they get going again. And I tell myself this now, and I tell people this all the time. I said, this journey that you get on starts at birth and it goes on forever, no matter what you're trying to do. It's something that you're going to continue to do, but As long as you tell yourself that you are better today than you were yesterday, you will always be successful. There is nothing greater than saying, I learned something from what I did yesterday. Now, are there going to be bad moments? All the time. All the time. I still get into it today. But as long as you don't turn those bad moments into self-sabotage. So what is that? So basically, doubting yourself so much that you then give up on what you're trying to do. People don't go from 0 to 60 in a second. Even the fastest cars don't go from 0 to 60 in a second. They might go there in 3 seconds, 4 seconds. I'm not a car guy, but in that amount of time. But it still takes time, right? So in order for us to grow, it takes time. So working there was amazing. Now I didn't do the show, but I did everything I needed to do to be in the show. I just was preparing for my move here to Vegas. So I just really didn't have the funds to do it. But I'd started around 280, 290 pounds. I got down to my lowest ever, I think ever since I was like in middle school, to about 225. I was lean. I had about 11% body fat. It was the greatest thing ever. But you know what's funny is that even at that moment, I still looked at myself and still found faults. So even at my greatest moment, or what I thought up to that point, my greatest moment, I was still doubting myself. For me, that's okay. And some people will say, well, you have to celebrate. And I tell people this all the time. You have to celebrate the small successes. No matter how small they are, how big they are, you celebrate it all. But for me, that is my driving force. It's not a drive for perfection, but it's that drive for betterness. I will always have this feeling inside of me from the time that I was as young that I could remember to now that I have to be better than only one other person, me. Whereas when I was younger, I had to be better than the other kids. I had to be smarter than the other kids. Now it's me. It's me versus me and only me. And that's what drives me every single day. So where people see it as like I just want to be perfect. I want to have the perfect body. That's no such thing as the perfect body. No, I want to look better, but I want to look better for me. I want to feel better for me. I want to think better for me. Our greatest weapon that we have on our body is our brain, and people don't realize it sometimes. It can be a very powerful tool. It could be positive, it could be negative. And that's what I learned going through that process of the competition, was that as many positive times that I had plenty of negative times. But what I learned through that process is that allowing myself to live through that negative time, to sit in it, to understand it, and then to move from it was a success in itself. Success is not always visual, physical, but rather it could be mental. Dealing with an issue, dealing with our anger. Believe it or not, I can get angry, but I've learned how to process that. I get anxious, I get frustrated. Again, dealing how to process or having that ability to process that. You know, there are times that I look back now and I look back through everything, especially doing something like this. I was scared to do it because I was not more afraid about what people would think, but about more of what I was going to uncover about myself. Looking back at the pictures, my younger self, I remember looking at them and being like, who is this kid? And asking myself, like, who is this kid? He looks so happy. And he looked so joyful, not knowing everything that he was going to go through. But it makes me appreciate the process even more. Because while I am 36, that's not an old age. I'm not saying it's old. It's not young. But what's great about it is that I feel like I'm just now getting into the beginning stages of what is going to be great. You know, it's a process. It's a plan. And it might not be ours. It definitely isn't ours. I know that for a fact. I've learned that. I, every day in my head, have an intention of doing the things on my list or the things in my head that I want to do. They don't always work out that way, but in the end, it's going to get done. But as far as the overall plan is concerned, there is that greater plan for me. And that's what I'm here to live for. And, you know, people will think, well, like, whoa, you just found that out in like a year? And to be honest, I did. But it took 34 other years to get to that point. And that was the biggest thing. Being able to then process all 34 years into 1 year to say what those years meant to me is amazing. And it makes me so grateful for everyone who's come into my life, been in it, who might have just passed through, because it makes me understand why they had to do what they had to do. Whether they were for good, whether they were for bad, or indifferent. Everything has a purpose, and I see that, and I find it out every single day. And so with the move to Vegas, you know, it was a big thing. I've always wanted to get back west. Obviously, leaving my mother was not, I didn't think she would still be in Maryland. I thought she would have moved back to California, but she is. Leaving her was hard. Leaving my friends was hard. But I remember when I first moved here and I got my first job, I got a job right away, like in August. I moved in July. And people would always ask, you know, why'd you move? Why'd you move? It was one of those things. And it was interesting because you can only tell a certain few, or you could tell people, some people, the real reason why you moved. And then some people you just kind of say, oh, it was just a feeling. So, you know, the real reason is, well, God pushed me to move. Well, why did he push you to move? Because in our most uncomfortable state, are we then able to grow? And Baltimore was great. Baltimore was amazing. I love the city. I love the Ravens. But I was just existing there. I wasn't growing anymore. I was the person everyone thought I was, and a little bit more up to that point. But there wasn't going to be anything else. So in order for me to now evolve into the person that I am today, I had to move. Now, Vegas, the place, it really could have been anywhere, honestly. But Vegas, I'd never been. It's cute. It's cool. It's whatever. But I had to be uncomfortable in order to change. And to say I've been so uncomfortable is true. But to see the things that I've done up to this point, and to see the things that are possibly coming after this point, is the reason why I did what I had to do. But it all goes back to everything that was done up to this point. And like I said, who's been in my life, who's been out of my life, and every moment that has happened in my life. But as far as it goes now, it's been an amazing journey. It's great. I can't wait to see what's left. Not even what's left, what's coming up. Because I don't even know. But until then, I'm just going to have fun with it. Thank you guys for tuning in. This was great. So make sure you subscribe to all the social media platforms. Raybone17 on Instagram, Thomas Raybone on Facebook, and this YouTube channel here. Got a lot of great things coming up. Please check us out. We're here for you.